Hello and welcome along to another episode of my favourite game from the Honest Football Podcast. Each week we interview different guests about their footballing history, whether it be as a fan, as a player, a coach or anyone else involved in the game. And this week we're joined by a former pro. And it's a man that I was quite interested in talking to because he of course played for my beloved Luton Town. Perhaps one of the most notable spells of his career were there, or in fact two, as he came back as a permanent player again. And there's also a bit of controversy around that which we delve into in the episode. We also talk about his stints at other clubs, most notably Bristol City. We also talk about a range of footballing topics, including growing up in an English football academy, something which has drastically changed since he did so about 25 years back. We talk about some of the best players he's played with, some of the best players he's seen, and of course his favourite game as well. And there's also some brilliant insight to football behind the scenes, particularly in regards to transfers, working with administrators, getting deals done at short notice, and just what goes through a player's mind when they're making a change. So it's really worth a listen, and it's one that I've particularly enjoyed, so I hope you enjoy it as much as I did. So a big thanks for Tony for coming on the show. If you do enjoy it, please put a thumbs up on the video, subscribe for regular content and interviews from the Honest Football Podcast, and give us a follow on Twitter at HonestFootball3. Okay, I'm delighted to be joined by Tony now. So firstly, thank you for coming on. I do appreciate it.
No problem.
And I'll start, as I always do, for everyone, just to give them a bit of a background of your life and your venture into football. So going back well before the years of becoming a pro, which I'm sure we'll get onto later, what are your first footballing memories, both playing and as a fan, as a child, anything you remember on TV, live, what might it be? First memory.
Yeah, I think watching the 86 Cup final, 1986 World Cup, I think it was, which obviously England got beat by Argentina with a Maradona handball, was probably the first recollection for me. Watching it upstairs, I always remember watching. I was talking about it to somebody the other day. In them days, obviously, you working class parents. My mum sent me upstairs to watch it on a black and white TV. So I always remember watching that particular game in 1986 on a black and white TV upstairs in the spare room, whilst they were watching the colour TV downstairs. And that's kind of my first recollection of watching football. But I was playing it from quite a very, very young age, whether it be in this school playground, whether it be playing for under eights, local football, etc., right through to obviously a football career. But yeah, that's my kind of, I kind of got into it really early. I was about, 86, I was about 13, 14.
Fair enough. And then I guess, do you remember the first game moving on from that you went to physically in the stands?
Yeah, I went to watch. I got invited because I was on Leicester's books as a. I wasn't an apprentice at the time. I was a schoolboy, but they do similar things now, where they take groups of young footballers to games. Well, they did that back in the day, and I went to watch Notts County versus Brighton, and it was Alan Young's. I don't know if you remember Alan Young, but it was his last game for. I can't remember whether it would be Brighton or Notts County, but we got an invite to that, and that was exciting as a young lad going to that. So
that's a good one. I'll take that. And then I guess you've sort of moved on to my next question, which is talking about something that we don't have often. We've only had a few pros on before. Is talking about that sort of life as a youth footballer in an academy or going through a youth team at a professional club. Talk to us a little bit about that, because it's something most of us sort of wish we could know.
Yeah, I like you've obviously just touched upon it now. They don't have a system now. It's kind of under 21s, you know, which I've been to see a few games over the years. So things have changed. So the apprentice scheme's kind of changed a little bit. Schoolboys probably still there, but they've just got different kind of terminologies to how they run things at football clubs right now. Yeah, so for me, it's kind of, because things have changed that much, for me, I got schooled up really well. So did the normality of cleaning the boots and breaking into the reserves and all the stuff that we're kind of familiarised with. That obviously doesn't happen so much in this day and age. Probably does at the lower league football, but not so much at the higher end. So kind of that's my enjoyment, my schooling into how to be a pro or how to even be an apprentice, and then the next step and the next step. Whereas now it is totally a little bit different.
And what do you make of the difference between it now? Do you think it has an effect, or does it create a different type of player in this generation?
Yeah, absolutely. I think you'll see an awful lot of footballers now that kind of go through the system. I'm still good friends with a guy called Trevor Peake who played for Luton. Good captain Peake he was, even though he was one of the oldest players to captain Luton. I was a young lad learning my trade through guys like that. Well, he's been at Leicester for about 12 years now, taking their youth team, etc., etc. And me and him many a time had a conversation about this. Now, they get thrown into the under-21s when they get to about 18, 19, whether they're going to keep them on or not.
Yeah.
And then, for some reason, if they're quite not good enough, they fizzle out of football. Whereas with me, if we weren't quite good enough, we get an opportunity to go for trials. Whereas a lot of players nowadays don't have that system.
Yeah.
You know, they may ponder for a little while and then try and make it, but they seem to vanish from the face of the earth. Where we couldn't afford to not take that risk. If you really wanted it, when I was growing up, and even guys before me, you dug your heels in and went for trials. You never hear of them stories anymore. So the answer to your question is, I do prefer the more hunger in your belly from when I played than to now. I think it's too easy now to give in, I suppose.
Yeah, I completely understand. I guess it's a fairly common view, particularly from the generation of footballers before. And I know a lot of them work in the youth systems now, and we've had a couple on who had almost a bit of resentment towards the way it works now, just because of the lack of opportunity and the lack of hunger after the initial academy system, where they don't have quite that work or graft that they used to have to go through before.
No, absolutely. I think you're spot on. I mean, we'll use Luton as a great example. They've always been good at bringing young players in and giving young players a chance, and they still do that. I'm not saying they don't, but if you look back in our generation, a lot more younger players would definitely get an opportunity, whereas now I don't think they do, unless they're an all singing, all dancing footballer. Yeah. Somebody will not probably give them that opportunity that maybe they probably would have got maybe 20, 30 years ago. So it has changed. You find that the top level footballers in them under 21 academies, like your Leicesters, your Arsenals, your Man Uniteds, all these big clubs, when they don't quite make it and they're not getting that opportunity to break in the first team because of the financial backing and the quality that Premier League teams have, they generally drop down to Division 1, Division 2 teams to really have a good go. So they do get an opportunity, but it's very thin, I'm afraid.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I guess Luton's a very good example, because even, I guess, when I started going, which was probably around the turn of the century when you were just about to come back for your second spell, or your second permanent spell, I should say. Even then, there were probably 4, 5, 6 a season that made their debut. And now probably James Justin's been the only one in the last 3 or 4 years for us. So.
Yeah, absolutely. I remember players probably just before me, like your Scott Oakes, Des Linton, that basically broke into the team a couple of years before me, and they were an inspiring players from Leicester's reserves.
Yeah.
Now that wouldn't happen now, and then look at the careers that them two had. They both probably made well over 150 games for Luton within that time. I'm not sure about Des, but I know Oakes had a great spell. Yeah. But and you did get an opportunity to take someone from the reserves, put them straight into the first team, and really give them a chance. Whereas you're right, I don't think a lot of clubs do that, and it's been like it for probably, I'd say, anything between 10 and 15 years now.
Yeah, it is such a shame, I must say. But we will move on and talk a bit more about you in detail now, I guess, which is probably the main part of this episode. And obviously, you're one of the few guests we've had on who have had a pretty illustrious career as a pro. And as you mentioned off camera before, for the Luton Town team, who I've got lots in the background as a big fan of. So talk to me a little bit about Luton, because obviously it was the first professional club where you really made a massive impact in your career. And it's sort of that big season in the 90s led to your big moves and most of your career afterwards. So talk to me about getting that opportunity and how you found your early years at Luton.
Yeah, so I think I touched upon it, that David Pleat, I owe a lot to David. He brought me from Leicester. I'd just been released from Leicester. Brian Little and John Gregory and Alan Evans were the managers at the time. Great guys. And I picked up an ankle injury, and they decided to take on a couple of the young lads instead of me. So cut long story short, Pleaty had asked me to go over for a couple of games in the reserves, which we touched upon. So I got the train from Leicester on my own, straight down to Luton, got picked up from the train station, never been to Luton before in my life, and find myself playing in a couple of reserve games. Stayed over there for about a week and a half, and then you mentioned earlier that you had to earn it, and I really did earn it, because David had me for a week and then send me home for a week, and then bring me back, etc., etc. And it kind of formed I kept doing quite well in the reserves, which was a big step from youth team football into, let's say, strong men's football. And as you're well aware, I think it was called the combination back in the day, which was Luton's reserve level was tough. You had Arsenal, Spurs, Chelsea, Watford, Luton, all these teams down south. So for me to get thrown into that was an eye opener. But I kind of did okay, which enabled David to keep inviting me back. And then eventually I got to condense the story down, I think he gave me a month-to-month contract, which, again, we touched upon it. You've got to earn those deals. That wouldn't happen nowadays. No. You're either good enough or you're not. But because of the financial implications of 1991-92, when Luton had just got relegated out of the old the old First Division at the time, money was very tough. So he had to give the youth an opportunity. So I kind of hit the ground running, played a lot of reserve games, ended up getting a month-to-month contract, and that grew into I think he offered me a year, and it just all of a sudden happened for me. I played a few good reserve games, broke into the first team, I had a few sub appearances. Obviously, the Newcastle thing came very quickly, and then from then onwards, I kind of just got more confident and believed in my own ability, and obviously I had not a bad little run.
That would be fair to say. I think you're selling yourself a bit short there. But let's talk about leaving Luton for the first time, moving on. Talk us through it. How did it come about? What was your thought process? Because that's the bit most people don't get with transfers for pros, is what actually goes through the footballer's mind before the move happens.
Yeah, I mean, I'd scored 31 goals in 96, I think. It's 96. I'd scored, I think it was 12 goals in the Championship the year before, playing left wing. People forget that as well. So playing left wing, we got relegated, but I played really well. And I just, again, like I said a minute ago, I'd kind of gained a lot of confidence playing on the left with Mitchell Thomas, who's a real good player for me, helped me through via his experience. The following year, I hit the ground massively and hit 31 goals when Lenny Lawrence came in. But what all people don't realise is I'd actually scored 50 goals in 1.5 seasons before my move. That's never heard of. You get 15 goals now and you're gone. So I had to wait to get 50 goals. And then obviously some of the clubs came searching. As you're well aware, Fulham came in, Bristol City. I think Stockport at the time, which people will laugh about. I think they put a bid in for, I think it was 600 grand, Lenny said. They were in the First Division at the time. Gary Megson, I think it was. So there was a couple of clubs sniffing, and then I got a call to meet Kevin and Ray Wilkinson down at Harrods with my agent, and it just kind of all happened really quickly, that first move.
Absolutely. And I guess, well, as a Luton fan, I will talk about the other areas, but I want to get back to the second coming with Luton, because obviously you had the spells, as you mentioned, Fulham and Bristol City, then a couple of loan spells back at Luton before a permanent move. So what were your feelings about going back to an old club? Because obviously it's not something many players do. And did you have any thought that you couldn't do it? Did you have any thoughts, I can't go back to Luton?
Well, it was really strange because Bristol City had bought me for £1 million from Fulham after a short spell at Fulham. I didn't quite settle very well at Fulham, and Kevin was going to go and spend a lot of money. So he kind of said to me that you're not guaranteed a first team place. So I went to Bristol City, and then the manager at Bristol City got sacked that season, and Tony Pulis came in, and I don't need to explain too much, but I am not a Tony Pulis kind of player.
You're not quite 6 foot.
I'm not 6 foot, strong, quick. So we didn't see eye to eye, although I've met him since. He's a great guy. But so he basically said you can go on loan. And do you know the second spell? I think it was the second and third spell that I had back at Luton. Do you know, I really enjoyed that time because Luton were in a bit of bother. I think they were nearly going to get relegated, and I managed to get 4 or 5 goals and keep them up. Not just me, obviously. The rest of the players played a massive part. But I scored some vital goals and kept us up. And I don't think Luton had enough money to bring me back full time. And I went back to Bristol and then had 3 great years there. So scoring a lot of goals. So it kind of worked for me, but I probably would have come back to Luton if Lenny had had the finances, but he just didn't. So yeah, I had 3 great years at Bristol and then come back on on a permanent deal with Joe Kinnear and Mick Harford. So I really enjoyed that middle spell.
Absolutely. And I've got to say, those are some of my earliest football memories, watching you and that team, I guess, from the early 2000s, particularly the 02-03 season after the promotion from Division 3. But then I guess moving on, and it's probably, being a Luton fan, the most controversial moment that stuck for the 17 years since, which is the moving on to QPR. Obviously, what's happened off the pitch the 5 years after for Luton pretty much explains everything and every player that's left since. But talk to us a bit about it. Did the boardroom situation and the things going on off the pitch, did they have an impact on the team when you were playing?
Yeah, so you've mentioned a good point. So I'll kind of start at the beginning. So I got a call. Me and Big Steve Howard had a great season that year. I think we got 50 goals between the two of us. And we finished probably 10th or 11th. So it wasn't a bad season, but we just weren't quite good enough to make the playoffs. The second season, I was on fire. I think I scored 3 goals in the first 2 games. And it looked like we were going to have a good season. And we went into administration, which everybody's aware of back in the day, if you remember that. And I got a call to go up and see, and I'll tell you the exact story. I got a call. I'll tell you the good things and bad things that I did that day. So I got a call from the administrators with Mick Harford to go upstairs because Mike Newell had come in because Joe Kinnear had left. And Mike had kind of pulled me and said, Tony, you know, we've had a couple of bids, but the administrators are trying to sell you for 50 grand. And obviously we think you're worth far more than that. So I said, okay. He said, the players ain't going to get paid, which wasn't a major problem in them days, really, if I'm honest. The lads were okay. You know, we weren't struggling. We could afford to pay our bills. I'm not going to sit here and say that we were really, you know, in a bad way. And administrators had pulled me in and said, we're going to get rid of you. What people don't understand is administrators don't care how much you're worth. They just need to balance the books. They don't care whether I'm a good player or a bad player. So Mick had said, you're not going. Mike had said, you're not going. And then I got a call that evening from, I think it was Gary Waddock at the time, as you're well aware. He played for Luton. Well, he was at QPR and he kind of said, Tony, you know, Ian's put a bid in for you. What's your thoughts? And I said, well, it's a strange situation because I've been told that I can't leave. And he said, well, we've been told otherwise. We can put a bid in and they're going to accept it. The next morning, Sky came to the training ground and threw a microphone in my face and basically said, you know, what do we need to do as a team, as a group? And we had a great team at that time. You know, Nico, Howie, Emerson Boyce, all really great players who went on and had a fantastic couple of years after I was gone. And he threw a microphone in my face, and that's the biggest mistake I've made. I kind of said we need to stick together, but you got to remember at that time I didn't actually know I was going. But that night I actually made my mind up. So that was the biggest thing that people don't realise that. And I'm not looking for sympathy, by the way, after 17 years. But what happened was I got stuck in a situation where the club was saying you're not going, and QPR was saying we've already got you, kind of thing. And then by the next day, I'd made my mind up that I was going. It was my decision. I wanted to leave, you know, which didn't, as you're well aware, go down very, very well. And I think the story goes back long before me leaving to go to QPR. I think there's been a lot of rivalry between the two clubs in the 80s, 90s, so on and so on. So I think they used that as a bit of a scapegoat to really have a go at me. And I think it hurt a lot of people because I was leaving. But I didn't think it was going to have the impact that it did, if I'm honest. I didn't think it would be as bad as a reaction as I faced. And I've never sulked in between those years. I've got on with it, never really had a go at anyone about it. But that is the true story. And Mike Newell and Mick will tell you that.
And that's the thing really for fans is I guess you don't sort of assume that these things just happen that quickly, and you never see the behind the scenes conversations and just believe as gospel the things that come out of the boardroom, don't you? And so my club must be telling the truth.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not saying that I don't take some blame in this, because at the end of the day, I probably could. I think the real biggest thing that hurt me was people said that I went because I went for a pay rise. I actually took a pay reduction to go to QPR from Luton. And people, Ian Holloway, we used to laugh about it, me and Ian, and he said, you know, you came here on a reduced wage because they've just come out of administration. Yeah. But people don't see that. So QPR just come out of administration and Luton were in administration. So I had to take a pay cut to go to QPR. Yeah. So, but people wouldn't even think that. They said I was greedy and I went for the money. That is actually not the truth. And if it was the truth, I'd tell you, but it wasn't the truth at all.
But unfortunately, that wouldn't make quite as good a headline, would it, for the media? So.
No, they're not bothered. They want to write what they want to write. I've got no issues with that. But that is the truth. Me and Ian, when we bumped into each other, you know, he always says to me, Tony, you know, no one ever kicks a dead dog. So he said, if they're still singing about you and still talking about you, it means you meant something to them. Yeah.
I was going to ask you that, actually. Do you see it as a compliment, the fact that you must have had such an impact on the fans that they still think about you 15 years later?
Yeah, I mean, I scored 82 goals for Luton, so I definitely would have broke the 100 barrier, easy. And I would have loved to have done that because obviously I only got 62 in 120-something games for Bristol. So it would have been nice for me to have got the goals at Luton and obviously break that 100 barrier. But all in all, like you've just said, fans, do I appreciate that they probably had a go at me? No, not really. But did I expect any different? No, not really. I think that they voiced their opinion. I think what made it worse, and I think you'll remember this, Luton had a great team at the time, and we drew 1-1 at Kenilworth Road, and I got pelters. I was actually on the bench, which is the worst thing that could happen because I was getting it every time I warmed up. Yeah. So I'd just come back from a real serious ankle injury. And I managed to flick a ball onto Paul Furlong, and he scored in the 94th minute. And I think that just topped it all off for me. Yeah. I'm thinking, oh, shit, here we go. And there was banners everywhere, and I had to get escorted into the bus and stuff like that. But yeah, I look back and probably smile about it now, but it was quite a scary time.
Yeah, I guess you can't find many grounds where you're closer to the pitch when you're warming up either, can you? So.
No, I was just so pleased that the dugouts had moved from 1990s over to the other side where it's only the boxes. I didn't get as much stick from the boxes as I would have done from the other side.
And I guess moving on, because of course we're not going to go into great detail about it, but as you mentioned, the fans have held a bit of a grudge, and you've had the sort of famous songs around football fans, which obviously aren't pleasant, particularly when they're not about yourself. Absolutely, and they're about relatives and things about that. But
it's quite funny because the song, my mates laugh about it because I've got loads of Luton friends.
Yeah.
And they've said to me before, you know, we're really close friends, and they said they sing along to it just because it's funny. They don't sing along to it because it means anything. My mum's been to watch me once probably twice actually in 25 years, and she'd be distraught if I ever told her. She actually doesn't know what the song is. She's never even asked me. She hasn't got a clue, and I certainly wouldn't tell her. But yeah, she'd laugh if I told her. But no, I do giggle because I'm thinking that has no relevance to anything of what I did.
And I guess, to be fair, just to put it into perspective, you have obviously come back since and played in your charity game and things like that. I've seen that as well. So it's good to see that you've not held that grudge from your side of things as well. I know it's easy not to, but.
Well, no, I got called back. I think they had I'm not sure if it was a Charity Legends Day. I can't remember, probably about 8-9 years ago. I really enjoyed that. I didn't get as much stick as I thought I would. There's a younger generation that's never seen me play, so that, you know, they're not going to know anything about it. It'll be mums and dads that probably remember the tough times that we had from kind of mid-90s right through to early 2000s. So my biggest regret with Luton is the old players. Not many of the old players get invited back, and I think that's quite sad, and I don't know who makes that decision. But I was with Kevin Nichols about 3 weeks ago, and he's never been invited back to the club, and he's probably the greatest captain after Steve Foster you've ever had. So that's quite upsetting, really, that people like him, maybe myself, don't get an invite or don't get recognised for what we actually did.
Well, that's the thing I was going to say. In terms of if you take away the transfer controversy and all of that, in terms of your on-the-pitch performance, you'd be held as a Luton legend for your performances. And the same for Nichols as well, as you mentioned.
Oh, yeah, definitely. I'd be disappointed if me and Kevin weren't up there as Luton legends. I mean, I've got posters in my garage of me being in a Luton Legends picture. Yeah. I don't think they'll be making any of them anytime soon. But what I'm saying is, it's just disappointing that Luton's a great club in a great position right now. Hopefully, whether they can stay, no one knows what this season is going to bring at the moment. But, you know, they're in good shape. Gary seems to have done a really good job. He's dug his heels in for many, many years now. But like I said, there's a lot of good players that don't get asked back. I was at Bristol City last week, about a month ago with their 125-year anniversary. Yeah. As you know, there's a plaque on the wall. I'm not saying I want a plaque at Luton's wall, but there's a plaque on the wall for being in the top 10 goal scorer in their history. Yeah. I'd probably be in top Luton's 10 or 15 in their history as well. Yeah. So, you know, that's the only thing that I kind of get upset about, because at the end of the day, it's gone now. What's happened is gone. There's a new generation of supporters. Yeah. And let's face it, half of them wouldn't even know who I was now. So,
I guess the point you mentioned as well, using Kevin Nicholls as an example, just shows how many times, even in my lifetime, Luton have had to sell players due to financial trouble. So thanks for the memories for that one.
Yeah. Well, Nico was a proper skipper, a very, very good player. And Gebby's all for Luton, probably his greatest club that he's ever played for. And I think the fans absolutely adored him. But what I mean is, it's not down to him. It's down to the board or somebody from the board that doesn't really want to deal with players like me and him, I suppose.
Absolutely. And I guess the one other question I wanted to ask you about your career moving later is there's sort of two schools of thought amongst pros. Some which, once they've sort of reached their peak and they start to get to the decline in their 30s, who say immediately, I'm going to stop playing football. And there are some who then work their way down the leagues and want to carry on playing for as long as they physically can. Now, you obviously sort of consist more in the latter because you worked your way down and ended up playing in non-league further down. So talk to me about that decision. Was it as simple as, I want to play football and I'm going to do it as long as I can?
No, my last kind of league club, I think, was Grimsby, I think. I played 4 or 5 games. And I always remember it because I'd kind of gone from, I can't remember. That's it. I went to Swindon. I never settled at Swindon at all because I was travelling from Milton Keynes, because I lived in Milton Keynes, to Swindon every day. That was a 4-hour round trip. So I really struggled at Swindon. And, you know, bless him, Andy King, who's not here anymore, great guy. He bought me. And then I went on loan to Grimsby, I think. And then I went on loan to Stevenage. How I ended up there, I do not know. But I just wanted to carry on playing. So I was only 33 at the time, so it was a little bit too young for me to retire. I didn't want to retire at 33, so I carried on playing. And I got to be honest, I picked up a couple of niggles, and I really struggled. I was never the quickest anyway. As soon as I lost, you know, that strength and that power in and around the box, kind of deteriorated a little bit as a player. And I picked up an eye injury in non-league, and I just thought, I don't need this anymore. I'll jack it in. I think I've had an okay career. I think I finished with 167 goals, somebody was telling me the other day. So I was well happy with my achievements. Yeah. And I just ended up in non-league. But I also remember playing against, remember a guy called Alan White?
Yes.
Centre-half. Well, he went to Darlington, and I remember I used to... He won't mind me saying this. He's a good lad, Whitey. But I used to tear him a new one every time we trained or played or whatever. He never got nowhere near me. When he was at Colchester, I'd score every time I played against. And he was at Darlington, and he was in his late 20s, and I was about 34, 33, something like that. And I'd gone to sprint for a ball, and he literally just burst past me. and I just, that day, I just thought, I'm done. My legs have gone.
Just a moment like that.
It was just a moment like that where I thought, these are young lads. I'm now getting a bit older. And I just knew that day. I remember the game was at home. We got beat actually at home by Darlington. And I just thought, I'm done. But yeah, it's not because I wanted to prolong my career. I just don't think my body wanted me to.
No, fair enough. I guess that's one of the questions I was going to ask. The follow-up is, how do you get to that point of knowing you're going to retire? Is it just as simple a moment as that? Just one little moment can cause it?
I remember that day clear as it was yesterday. I'm 46 next week, and shit, that's 12 years ago, give or take. Yeah. And I just remember playing, thinking, I haven't got that zest of. I always had. I felt that I had good feet and clever brain, but you still need to get around the pitch. And I was never the most quickest or the most mobile, but I was cute. And I felt if I've lost that half a yard that I never had, it's like Jamie Curriton right now is playing still. And he's 45. I think he's a year younger than me, Jamie. Yeah. And I looked at his body, and he's still got the same body that he had when he was probably 18 at Norwich. Yeah. So, fair play to him. He's really stuck at it. But for someone like me who's stumpy and quite strong, I couldn't do it. I picked up hamstring injuries, and I didn't really look after my body as well towards the end when you should. So,
okay. And I guess moving on to the last question about your career before we move on to your favourite games, I wanted to ask you about something you picked up on earlier in your career. Is it's not often that players, after they finish their youth career, change their position. So talk to me about the process of that, how it came about. Was it a manager? Was it yourself? Was it players? What influenced it?
Yeah, so I think I mentioned earlier on that we played in the first division for Luton, and we got relegated. Lenny Lawrence had come in and again done well in the reserves, and he flung me straight in the first team on the left with Mitchell, and I managed to get a few goals that year, and we got relegated. So he pulled me at the start of pre-season and said, "Tony, I'm going to play you up front. You've got an eye for a goal. You've got great feet. If we can get someone to play up front with you to get hold of it, I played with Dwight Marshall. I played with Kim Grant. I played with David Oldfield, Stuart Douglas, all these fast, kind of quick players, and it kind of complimented me. So he said, I'm gonna fling you up front this season." And we played against Burnley at home. We got absolutely battered. It was the hottest day ever. You might remember it as a Luton fan. We got beat 3-1, but I scored and played really well up front. And then he kind of kept me up. He kept me there. And I got used to it. I got used to my positioning. I got used to learning how to play up front. So I'd say Lenny was the main reason for me to make that decision, to make that transformation from, because a left-sided player is somebody who can get down a wing, get balls in. I was never like that. I was more cutting inside and linking. So as long as he got me doing that further up the pitch, he felt that we'd get more opportunities, which we did. So
it's great to see that it can be such a simple thing, especially in these modern days with sports science and tactical analysis all over the place, just to see, I think you've got an eye for it, let's give it a go. That's sort of the thing that's missing in football a bit to us.
Yeah, it's very rare now that you'll get top players your top players can play anywhere, really. Yeah. They can. I mean, if you ask De Bruyne to play off the front, it crews it, But in them particular days, you're right. It's very unlikely that you would turn a left winger into a centre forward or a midfielder into a centre forward. And those were the positions that Pleaty used to play me. He used to play me centre midfield, playing off the front too, or he'd play me on the left. So for them to take that opportunity, you've got to tip your hat off to them, because you're right, they don't do that as much in this day and age.
Absolutely. And I guess moving on to the final section then, which is about your favourites. I'm going to ask you one quick question before we lead up to your favourite football matches, which is, you've played with a huge number of very good strikers in your career. Who was your favourite strike partner?
Right. I think the best... Right. I mean, I had to name the Luton team not so long ago, and I put Steve Howard up there. I felt that Steve was complimented really, really well. Big, strong boy, flicked things on, got hold of it. We did okay in one season together. Yeah. But a player that I didn't play a lot with, I played with David Oldfield. I played with top players like David. I played with Lee Peacock, Peter Beadle. I mean, the list is endless, but I have to say the best out-and-out centre forward, the two best, Luton fans won't like this, is Paul Furlong for QPR. Yeah. What a player he was.
Well, we got him right at the end.
And he was 37 when I played up front, and he looked like a 20-year-old. He was so strong. He was such a good player, got hold of it. He'd have to be he was a proper centre forward. And Kev Gallen, who again you had at Luton, a very talented player. So the answer to your question, I'd have to probably say would be probably Kev, Paul, and Steve, really, big Stevie Howard.
Good to know, even though probably not all famed for Luton, all of them played for Luton. So I've seen them all live, which is great.
Amazing. Yeah, they did all play for Luton. I didn't know Furs was at Luton, but he did have a little spell, didn't he?
Yeah, he had the year when we
I
came
mean, he
down.
might have been about 40 then, or whatever he was.
Yeah, it was him and Pesca Salido combined age 77.
Wow. I played with Paul as well.
Killer instinct he had for the 2 games he played.
I played with Paul Pescadino at Fulham, obviously. So, you know, that was a different one because we had 2 little strikers together. So, yeah, strange.
And then on to the last question, which is the big one, the title of the series. And I'll let you have 2 games because you're both a football player and a football fan, obviously. So tell me about your favourite games. You can list them off as you eliminate them, but your favourite game as a football player and then as a fan as well.
Well, I'll start as a player. So played in lots of games throughout my career. Scored quite a few hat-tricks for Bristol and Luton.
Yeah.
I'd have to say my favourite game for Luton would have to be the first one, which was not, I didn't play very well actually. It was at Newcastle.
Yeah.
The only reason that I would say that's my favourite game is because I scored and Luton had a good cup run. And I just think that was my kind of invitation into football, really, scoring a goal of that magnitude at 18 years old or whatever it was.
Yeah.
So I'd have to say that's my favourite game for Luton. My favourite game for Bristol City would be the local derby against Bristol Rovers, where I scored the winner, live on Sky. The favourite game I've ever watched. Are you talking about any Premier League games or just game that...
Any football match, your favourite football match of all time? If I had to say, pick your favourite game.
Wow, so many. Oh, that's a real tough one. I'd have to say it was Wayne Rooney's hat-trick on his debut for Man United. I'm not a Man United fan, but I remember watching it in the living room that day. I was still playing myself, and he just burst into Manchester United's team.
Yeah.
I think they won 3-0 and he got all 3.
Yeah.
And it was his debut, and I just thought, wow, this is a special player here. So I really enjoyed watching him as a young lad going to Man United. Such a big club and big expectations, and he delivered.
Yes.
And then lots of England international games, unfortunately, we all hurt him through because they don't seem to win anything. But probably that one, probably that Man United game. I can't remember who they played.
Fenerbahce. Fenerbahce.
Yeah, there you go.
I've got to say, I'm not a United fan either, but even I remember that free kick in that game.
I'm not a Man United fan, but I just remember the game because I remembered him bursting into Man United's team with all that pressure on him, and he just absolutely delivered.
Made it look easy.
He was like a young boy in a playground, wasn't he?
Yeah, absolutely.
Tearing them to pieces at 19, I think he was. So yeah.
A brilliant game to pick, and obviously some wonderful memories as a player. We can't thank you enough for coming on and sharing some of your experiences. We do appreciate it. If you did enjoy the episode, please let us know. Any questions or messages for Tony, put them down in the comments below. But Tony, thanks very much for joining us.
Top man, take care.
That's it for this week's episode of My Favourite Game. Thanks again to Tony for joining us. I really enjoyed the episode. There was some fantastic insight, particularly in terms of transfers, boardrooms, stuff I didn't really expect. So thanks to Tony for that. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. Please put a thumbs up on it and don't forget to follow us on Twitter. And we'll be back soon with more content. So make sure you subscribe and click that bell.